Hi, it's Jared from Strongrootsfarmoh, and this is How to Build a Homestead or a Small Farm, Part 3. As a quick recap, Part 1 was about what to do before you buy land, how to prepare where you're at now. Part 2 was about purchasing what you're looking for, whether it be a ready-built farm or homestead, something that's already pre-established, or is it better to start with blank land? We're going to talk about aspects of land to pay attention to when you're buying. So what do I mean by this? Today, these aspects are things to look at specific to the land when you go in. It's going to be things like access and watershed and where the power comes from, all kinds of different things. So if this is what you're looking for, stick around. We're going to go through all of them. All right, welcome back. We're going to get started right away here. So the very first thing, and probably arguably the most important thing with any farm, homestead, is access. When we're talking about access, I'm going to give you an analogy. Okay, so I want you to think about, you're going to start a farm or a homestead and you're going to buy some calves or you're going to sell some calves. And think about the person that is either bringing or coming to pick up what you're selling is coming in a older, kind of beat up, two-wheel drive truck, and he has a borrowed trailer that is longer and bigger than really his truck can handle, and he's not an experienced driver. So think about that guy, think about that truck. Now understand, in Ohio, it's very rare for a farmer or homesteader not to have a four-wheel drive truck. We have snow like you see behind me, we have clay soils, and we get a lot of rain, which makes for very good mud. So four-wheel drive is something that is definitely needed in the Midwest if you're a farmer or homesteader. And I know down in Texas, I was really kind of surprised when I lived down there how many two-wheel drive trucks I saw. It was way more common in those type of environments. So I want you to rein in that view, this particular situation kind of to the Midwest so that you can understand what I'm talking about with access. So this guy comes to your farm with said cows. Can he turn around? Is there going to be a big enough area that he can get in and not wreck your world with his trailer as he's coming in? Or is it you? Maybe you're not an experienced driver. Can you get around, be out of the mud, all those kind of things? Now, this property probably doesn't have an established parking lot like this, but can you build it? So there's some things that you need to think about. One, how hard is the direction to your small farm or homestead? Are you going to have a farm store? Are you going to want to be buying and selling stuff? Are you trying to make money? Or are you trying to hide? Which is fine. If you don't want anybody to ever come to your farm, this may be a different situation, but there still are some aspects of access. But for us, people come here to buy stuff. They buy live animals, they buy beef and pork. We sell stuff to make a profit on our farm, and I have to get in and out of here with a big cattle trailer. So we have a long driveway. It comes back past the house, which is nice because anybody that comes in, we get to see. And right over there is the highway. You might even be able to hear it. It's about 300 yards over there to the highway. It's very easy to give somebody directions to my farm. We're out here at the road. So what is the road like to this place? We have a pavement road, which is kind of nice, but it's a one-lane dead-end road. If somebody comes past my farm, at the other end of this road, it is not going to be fun to turn around with a cattle trailer if he misses my driveway. So we're the first place on the left. We tell people that all the time. We have a clearly marked mailbox. Okay, so there's things that you can do. I have a 40-foot wide, probably even 48-foot wide driveway. I widened this when we came so they can swing in without going in my ditch. But here's the problem. So this is an access problem for my farm. When people come out, if they don't pay attention and they don't know what they're doing and they don't get way over here and swing to go back out towards the highway, they'll drop their trailer off right here. So I've widened this. I've worked with a neighbor to extend that culvert 8 foot and put it in grass, added a little berm there of gravel, but people still do it. When they come in here, they still don't know how to drive a trailer because it's a one-lane road. They can't swing over into another lane to get more leeway with their trailer. They have to drop that tire off the other side sometimes. This can be a problem for me. So this farm or homestead that you're buying, does it have road access issues like this? Do you have to climb a steep embankment to get up to the house or the barns? Is that guy in that trailer gonna be able to get up or down that hill? Behind us here, my kids call this the creek, but it's not. This is just a ditch, a waterway between my house and my barns. We put big rip-rap stone in it. But do you have to cross a creek? To get to where you're gonna build your homestead, is there a creek or a big ditch like this that you would have to cross? Are you gonna have to put big culverts? Is that gonna be enough during a flood to stop the water or to allow the water through without causing damage? Are you gonna have to build a bridge? And that's really just the driveway and getting in to your facility. What about the rest of the farm? Can you access everything with animals, with a gator, side-by-side four-wheeler? Can you get there every inch of your property that you're purchasing? Can you access it? And so if there's a creek that runs down the middle of this property, your dreams, you might think that's a beautiful thing, but can you get there on the other side of it with your animals, with your four-wheeler? What about, does it flood? How much water does it have in it year round or most of the year? That's gonna cause you problems. Is it super hilly? If you buy a 20-acre farm and 10 acres of it is so steep only goats can go on it, I would look at that as a 10-acre farm or homestead. So you have to look at all those things when we're talking about access. People getting in and out, people being able to buy stuff, sell stuff, what kind of weather damage is gonna be for creeks and access to those points, how close and hard is it to get to this place? Does GPS even work? And most importantly, can you use every inch of this farm or homestead you're buying? Now I understand you can get a better deal on hillside land like that, and it's not a bad idea to have some, but don't pay full price for it, and understand when you're evaluating property versus property, I would take that acreage out when you're comparing so that they're apples to apples. Owning land that is not able to produce a product is not useless, but as a homesteader or a small farmer, it is gonna not help you with your taxes and your profitability. So that has to be weighed. Can you access everything on this new piece of property? The second thing that I look at, and people make fun of me because I talk watershed all the time, and that's what it is. Watershed. Where does the water come from? Where does the water go? When we're talking watershed, I would like for you to try to talk to somebody in the neighborhood, the neighbors. It would be nice before you signed for this property if there was an 80-year-old guy across the street that has been there since he is 12 and he loves to talk to you about all the problems that's ever been there. That's a dream when we're talking about you buying this piece of property. It may not sound fun to you, but that's a dream because he's gonna tell you, I remember when the snow was this deep. I remember when that creek got this high. I remember when these froze up and we didn't have power for 2 weeks. All those kind of stories. You wanna know about the worst of times, and finding somebody local to tell you that about this land is almost invaluable. I am not in any way, shape, or form making light of the tragedy of disaster. So I want to talk about this year, this past year, we have seen flooding in places that did not flood before, like North Carolina. We have seen fires in California raging through, and there's always fires in California, but this is widespread and devastating. When you're looking at watershed and those types of things, the problems of the weather, you need to look at and say, what is the worst of times? Can we be prepared for it through our building? Or can we eliminate it in some form or fashion? Or is this always going to be a problem and you have to weigh that in your decision? Now, in North Carolina, I don't think any of those people could have been prepared. And I saw videos where people say you should have been prepared, and they weren't really thinking with an open heart and concerned about people. But that was a 50-year flood, some people called it. But there were people that lived, and I saw their videos, and I've had friends there that said, my grandfather was born on this property. We've lived here for 3 generations, and we had never seen the water that high. So why am I bringing this point up? When you start to look at land, you're gonna see it for its beauty because you're excited. You want to get to a farm or a homestead, and you tend to look at the things that are there that are good, and you don't necessarily think about natural disasters. Now, natural disasters are going to happen. You can't always plan for them. Things happen that are bad. That's why we have insurance. But when you look at a ditch like this, think about, okay, what if it was 10 times higher than that? Up this hill over here, up this hill over here. Are you safe? Will it affect your animals? Will it affect your house? Will it affect your barns? And then use that. Think about the worst case scenario on some of these things and use that to weigh them against each other. My last point on the watershed is we're going to talk about this ditch here, right? And it can be any kind of creek, any kind of big waterway, even just a dip in the land where water sometimes goes. I want you to think about having to fence across this. How do you fence across this? And what I find is when people have waterways or big ditches like this, or even small creeks, this is a problem for fencing in the point of animals getting out or creatures getting in, varmints getting in that you don't want in, usually big dogs or coyotes. So let's talk about this point when you're looking at the watershed, thinking about having to fence across it. So if you come upon a piece of property and it has a 12-foot creek down the center of this piece of property, you might think that that is just wonderful. There's running water, and it is. There's some good aspects of having constant running water on a property. Here in my area of Ohio, the property and the way land is broken up, they've done a pretty good job of the property line tends to go down the center of major creeks. Obviously not a water little ditch like this, but we have White Oak Creek, which is about 1/10 of a mile down this road. At the end of my dead end road, it dead ends into this creek, which is a good 40, 50 feet across. It usually has running water in it consistently about 8 inches up to 3 feet deep. So it always has just a little bit of water. It's not super bad. 90% of the time, you can drive a four-wheeler across it in most sections. There's a spot. Only when it rains really hard does it hit that 3 feet deep, and they usually have pretty good embankments along this creek in my area. But if I owned and land on both sides of the creek, that creek now becomes a problem, because if I have my animals across it, even if I could get them across it and a big rain would come and I wouldn't be there, how do I get them back across to safety? That's the first problem with the watershed. Second problem is, how do I fence it so that they don't go underneath the fence at this creek? Now, if it was a big creek like I'm talking about, and I'm not going to take you down there and video that, but if it were my property and I owned land on both sides of the creek, I would have 2 sets of fence. So I would fence this property, and then there would be, the creek would flow through, and then I would fence that side of the property, and I wouldn't try to fence across the creek. And I would have some posts there where I could run temporary wire when we were going to cross the creek to the other side, if that was even possible. But a small ditch like this, you could fence across this. There's a few different ways. You can buy a large 4, 5, 6 foot culvert to go in there. Just get a 6 or 8 foot section of it, fill it full of rock, and run your fence across that culvert. That's one option for you. And then on the side that the water flows in, so water flows this way, so on this side of that culvert, I'm gonna drive T-post stakes every foot to keep animals from going in there. Now that will not protect from coyotes and dogs. They're gonna be able to squeeze through, coons, different things like that. But it's gonna stop my calves and my cows from going through there. If you need to run some cross wires, fine. But if there's a lot of debris, if it's big enough for debris to flow down, you're gonna have to go and clean that and debris that. For me, if I have a creek that is big enough to push debris, that is kind of my moving point, that I'm gonna fence on this side and on this side of it and not let my animals down in there. That's the only way I can keep the fence good enough to prevent animals from going under at where that fence crosses. There's all kinds of different ways you can do it, but there's always problems. There's always something to clean up when there's debris that flows in where that fence crosses that creek. Now, I've had this question from a viewer as we get to this, and I'm going to go ahead and bring it up now. They have asked me, do you want your animals to drink from said creek? It's not the first time this has been asked. I've done farm consulting, talked to people on the phone, and this gets brought up a lot. 95% of the time, it is my advice that I do not let cattle get down into a creek. There's just damage there. Just think about a young calf, and 90% of the time, it's safe for them to walk to the edge and drink, and you can have a little gravel embankment that you put in, and there's ways to do it. But that one time that water gets rushing through there and mom goes through and calf gets caught, it's not worth it to me. That's one reason I don't do it. The other reason is if it's dry part of the year. So if water doesn't always run and cattle manure around that where they drink, the first issue is bacteria buildup. If water just kind of lays stagnant, kind of like drinking out of a pond, I'm not a fan of that either. But the other problem, especially around here, if you want to be in problems with big ag, let your cattle drink from the creek. What do I mean by this? So water is a natural resource, and for wildlife and the environment and these things, if they find that there's bacterial buildup in the water downstream from your farm, and they come to your farm and see that cattle are consistently in the creek, there's footprints, they can consistently see that you're drinking from the creek, you could possibility run into issues with the environmental control people because there's bacteria buildup. They'll say it's from your cattle. Is that true? Do I believe that cattle are destroying the water and that kind of stuff? I don't necessarily believe that, but I do know I have seen farmers get into trouble for manure watershed where they consistently let cattle drink from the creek. The second problem I see when farmers allow themselves to drink from the creek because it's easy, they tend to not rotationally graze very well. It's more easy, it's more apt for them to let cattle always come back to that point because they don't now have to trench water out there. So around that section of the creek where they drink from, or multiple sections, they always make it so that the cattle can come and drink from there. Therefore, there's more cattle pressure in your ground in that area, and people just use that as an excuse not to rotationally graze well. Whereas when I give my advice, and this is just my opinion, if you do it, it's fine. Do what you want to do. But I tell people to fence off the creek and then some kind of hydraulic ram pump or a gas pump or whatever you would use, get that water pumped to either a reservoir, or if it's enough pump that it has consistent pressure to fill up your totes. I really like the idea of a hydraulic ram pump to a big water tank that's higher, and then you can gravity feed. You go out there, you start your ram pump, it fills a 9,000 gallon or 5,000 gallon big tank, and that feeds you for a week or whatever the water usage would need for your cattle. Hydraulic ram pumps, you need to watch a special video about that. The one number that you need to know about hydraulic ram pumps, whatever the fall is, footage of fall is multiplied by 7 typically on a hydraulic ram pump, which means if the water falls 3 feet and goes into this pipe, you can now pump it uphill 21 feet of elevation. Now, every foot that you go higher, and this is the same with any pump, the pressure dies. So you really want to pump kind of as level as you can in any segment of time or place there. And that'll help your pumps run a little better to pump water out of the creek or pond for that matter. Come back into the shop. It's freezing, the wind's starting to blow on me, and the temperature's getting down, so we'll finish up in here. And that drinking out of a creek, drinking out of a pond, all the same thing for me. I fence off ponds. I know Greg, Judy, and other people, they like to build ramps. So if you're gonna let your cattle drink out of a pond, you build a ramp. Here's the advice I wanna give you though. If you think you wanna do it like Greg Judy does, You need to understand, his cattle do not drink from one pond for 100 days, right? He rotationally grazes. He has a lot of land and a lot of cattle. So the most I think you would see Greg Judy drinking out of one pond would be 2 or 3 days. So if you drink out of this pond for 2 or 3 days and you've built a way that the cows don't tear up the edge, and then you move on and don't come back to it for 100 days, that's a different situation than a small farm or homestead where cattle are always going to the same pond. They will stand in it, so they step in poop, they stand in the water, bacteria builds up, and then you have worms and other sicknesses and illnesses due to not having clean water. If you want to harm your cattle, the first and easiest way to do it is to not give them access to clean, healthy water. So I don't recommend, because of this situation with small farmers, that anybody lets their cattle drink out of the pond itself. Now, watering from the pond, yes, pond water is fine. You can gravity feed or pump, anything in that matter, but we don't let our cattle get down into a pond. It destroys the pond, and it's too much risk for bacteria for us. So you have to take that with a grain of salt and do what's best for you there. But this is the third issue. Third thing I want you to look at when looking at land is water. So we talked about water shedding away. Now how do we get water where we want it, when we want it? And that's gonna be on the water access. So yes, you can put as many lines as you want underground to as many locations as you want, but where does that water come from? Is it city water? Do you have a well? Are you pumping from a cistern? Does it come from a spring? You have to figure out how much this is going to cost you. As a homesteader, where you're trying to stay there and minimize bills, this is going to be one of the inputs to your farm that you're going to consistently have to pay month over month if you tap to city water. So how can you get away from this and limit yourself from inputs from outside off-farm inputs? So if you dig a well, you can do that. Wells are gonna vary in price depending on where you live. Around here, there's lots of water. It's not very deep. You can find water pretty easily. In Arizona or a high desert or wherever it would be, sometimes I've heard of 800, 900, 1,000 foot deep wells just to find good water. I know people that have tried 3 times to dig a well, and it was the 3rd time that they finally hit water. So they can be expensive. If you're going to dig a well, my piece of advice to you when you're buying the farm or homestead is that you should have that money up front. Before you build a building, before you build the house, the money should be in the bank account to dig the well and make sure you hit water before you break ground on the house. Because if you build a house and then you have no way to get water, you're in a mess. So dig the well first. Good piece of advice there, I think. Same line of thought. The 4th one is another utility, is our electrical power. You do need electricity. I know the Amish can live without it, and they have propane lights and other things. But if you're gonna run a small farm and you're gonna process animals, or you're gonna run refrigerators and freezers and sell, and you're gonna have electric fence, you need electricity. I am a fan of grid power. The consistency, I know it's there, but there is backups needed, okay? So if you're gonna run on solar, I think that's great, but you need to have a battery backup. A solar system with a battery backup, even if you do it DIY, I think you should have $30,000 to $40,000 in a bank account to put in a solar system. Now, I know there are people that have 10K systems and get by, but to run a big farm, to run a good size homestead with freezers, with heat, with refrigerators, with all the stuff that we need electricity for, lights, doing the stuff, the processing equipment, whatever it would be, right? You're gonna need a significant battery backup and a significant solar system. I'm all for you putting that in, but I like grid power. My plan in the future is to put solar on our house, have a battery backup system, but I will still stay tied to the grid in order to just minimize my bill, minimize that input, but not completely get away from it. That's where I'm gonna be at, but it's up to you. You have to make that decision. but you definitely have to have something to consider when you go buy your property. If you can't get power, you're gonna have to put in solar, and how much is that gonna cost you? Same thing as the well. If you're gonna plan on being on solar, you need to have that in place day one. Now, the sun is gonna come and go, right? It's gonna be everywhere. So you don't have to have it before you break ground, but you need to have the money set aside for that, because once you build your house, immediately you're gonna need power, and you're probably gonna need power to build the house. So I would have that system in place either as I'm breaking ground or before I'm breaking ground. Fifth thing that you need to look at, and this is gonna be really dependent on you and your ability to live without things, is access to off-farm inputs. And so what do I mean by this? I am a fan of a feed mill. We do not like to buy bagged feed. It comes in a bag, but we have a special mix ground at a local feed mill. And so access to a feed mill is a great thing. Somebody who can order in stuff for you. You need salts, you need minerals. Access to that. Now, will they ship all this stuff? Yes. But a feed mill, especially one that will deliver to you in big totes when you are starting out, or one that you can go and buy 200-300 pounds at a time that is already ground if they have their own mix. A feed mill is something that is very, very valuable to me. But I do think you need to have access to other things. You need to have access to a hardware store, and you need to have access to some kind of a farm and fleet, whether it's TSC, Rural King, whatever it would be. Some way that when something goes bad, you can leave, and my advice is go to this store, get the part, and be back to your house to fix it same day, whether that be an hour to 2 hour round trip, but close enough that if something broke today and you needed it and you didn't have it in stock, you could run out, get it, come back, and fix something the same day. On that line of thought, it would be the same thing for doctor's offices, emergency visits, grocery stores, ERs, whatever it would be, right? What do you have access to? How far is it from life? How far is it from the rest of the world? And some people might not think that's important, but if you're gonna sell products from a small farm or a homestead, unless you're planning on shipping everything, you need to have access to some place to buy stuff, because that's also where you're gonna sell stuff. So you need to think about that and as you're weighing stuff. Yes, it is nice to get away from society. It is nice to be out on your own in the quiet and not have neighbors. But the further you get out, the less community there is. I don't know how many times I have to beat that into you about the importance of community. But the further you get out, the less community, the less access to stuff, and the more expensive things become to get to that. How close is the nearest gas station? If you need fuel for something, a generator, whatever it would be, how close is something? How close is some propane company that to deliver? How close is any of that stuff? That's something you got to think about as you weigh this out. On that same train of thought, you have ag support companies or industries, right? So a vet, how close is the nearest vet? A good vet. If you're gonna have animals, you need to have access to a vet. How close is the nearest company that sells compost or fertilizer or those kind of things? If you need that kind of stuff, I pretty much order all my grass seed and have it shipped in. But it's nice to be able to just run and get a bag for a small area of construction that you're doing if you have that, or whatever it would be, right? Those kind of things, that's all on that same line of what do you have access to around you. Is probably more for small farmers than homesteaders, and that would be a livestock market. So whether that be a stockyard or an auction house or whatever that would be, this can be further, okay? I drive an hour and 40 minutes one way. Now I pass probably 7 stockyards on the way to this one that I like in Paris, Kentucky. But I drive a good ways because I only do that 3-4 times a year maybe to go either buy or sell. And I don't do it, I'm doing it less and less all the time, the more animals that we sell off farm, which in the spring here, I will have some animals to sell. And so I'll start with Facebook Marketplace and probably YouTube and that kind of stuff to sell. But then I need a place to go get rid of the animals that I need to get rid of. And so If you can't sell them to people, a livestock stockyard, auction house, something is nice to have access to. So within, I would say, 200 miles, you need to be within 200 miles of something like that. And pretty much anywhere in our country, I think you should be, but that's something to look into. And is it a good stockyard, or is the better one 400 miles away? We're really talking about out west. Cows are being noisy on the other side of that wall for some reason, sorry, but think about that. That's something to look into. Stockyards, where can you sell the animals, where can you buy animals? Last thing in total that you should look at when you're buying this piece of property, and it's probably one more important. These aren't in order of importance by any shape or form, but does it have what you need to become that farmer or homesteader? So if you're gonna heat with wood, does it have timber? If you have cattle, I'll tell you they need shade of some sort, whether you build a shade cart or you have some silvopastures or those kind of things. Woods are a great thing to have because it's a way that you can expand your farm. It's a way that you can heat your home. It's a way that you can get nutrients and allow, other things to build. So it's good for pigs. It's good for cattle. So some, wood property is good. I'm not all for the sawmill thing. I've talked against that a little bit just because the amount of money back for what you have to do, the time into it, it's not the first 2 years purchase. I would love to have one, but it's not at the top of my list. So as you're starting, I would not think sawmill. But is there timber there if you wanted to try to do some of that down the road? And then the land that's going to become pasture land, has it been farmed before? I would really love to know what's been done to it the last decade to 20 years. If it's been in monoculture, soybeans or corn or wheat or whatever it would be, and it's had glyphosates or even pastures that's been sprayed with Grazon and other herbicides or pesticides, it's going to take time for you to build the soil quality back up. So if you have two like item farms, except for this farm has been in monoculture, even if it's 2 or 3, 5 more acres for the same price, and this one has been in pasture for 20 years, I would pick the pastured land all day long, okay? You can have soil samples done before you buy. They don't take that long, but you have to look at that. How long is it going to take you to fix the soil? And that will help with the valuation of the land. If it's years because of chemical, ag products prior to you, you're going to lose production and it's going to cost you more money. To build established pastures in monocultured, blank land today, you're looking at $100 to $150 at minimum in my mind. Now, you can unroll hay and wait a lot of time. Yes, you can do that, and we're doing this pasture tests. But if you want pasture the very first year, you're going to have to put a little fertilizer down, in my opinion, or a lot of compost and seed, and you can spend money pretty quickly. Average bag of seeds around $100, and you're going to put at least 10 or 20 pounds to the acre on a new bare piece of land that doesn't have pasture on it. So that farm that already has established pastures has a value of at least $100 an acre more than that monocultured soybean field that you're going to turn into your small farmer homestead. Plus, it's probably 3 to 4 years before those chemicals are out of the ground to make you feel safe, if that's the reason you're going into this. If that doesn't bother you, if you don't care about chemicals and you're going to grain feed and all that kind of stuff, it's not a big deal. That's fine. I'm not against those guys. It's just not the way we have chosen to farm, but it's something for you to think about and what choice you're going to make when you start your small farm or homestead. Well, there you have it. I'm going to run through these real quick so that you can make a list as you start. So you're going to look at the land. How do you get to it? The access. Access is probably, in my mind, the most important. If you can't get to it and other people can't get to you, it's a big downfall. I would stay away from those types of properties, or if it lays wet, if it's always muddy, if it has floodplains, those kind of things all fall into access. Next is watershed. Where does the water come from? Where does the water go? Is it going to be a problem for you? The third and fourth are the two utilities, our water and our electric. Can we get water from the city? Do we have cisterns? Do we have wells? Can we put water to our animals everywhere on our farm? Next, the electric, how are you going to have to put that in? Is it solar? Is it from the city? Do you want that input? Can you get electric ran? How much is that going to cost you if they have to come down your street or 5 miles away and put in 10 telephone poles? How expensive is that going to be if there's no power there already? Those are all things to think about with the electric. Then we kind of move on to the community stuff. So access to a vet, access to a farm store, access to groceries, access to a place to sell your products. And then lastly, that stockyard, a place where you can buy or sell animals. What is the distance to these places from these pieces of land you're looking at? And finally, last, I'm going to title this one Quality of Soil. And so it's the land structure. Does it have woodland? Is it pastured? Is it monocultured? What does the land look like? And what is the value of the quality of soil? And so I will tell you, most people who have pasture land or monocultured soybean land, when you look at the real estate value, at least where I'm at, the bare soybean chemicaled land is usually more expensive than pasture land because it's able to be sold to a guy that wants to, put big ag, big equipment and raise monoculture crops like that. But you're better off as a homesteader or a small farmer with pasture land. The soil health will naturally be better with just grass, especially if they rotationally grazed and had good animal pressure. So that's kind of the last thing, soil quality. Well, there you have it. That is part 3 of our Build a Homestead or Small Farm series. I hope this video helped you. Please, I've been getting emails, I've been getting comments, and I am going to address those things, and I will touch on them in points. I'm not going to take your email and make one specific video about it unless it's a video all put about one topic. But I'm going to touch on these points, and I appreciate you sending them to me so that I can hit the things that people have questions about. So feel free, email me. It's down in the description. Like and subscribe if you want to continue to follow along with us. That thumbs up, that like, it really does help our channel to grow. So if you would like this, please hit that for us. I know that I'm not apt to always hit that like button, but it does help our channel. It really makes my time worthwhile and shows that the appreciation. So I would really appreciate it if you do that. We're going to continue this on and continue to work about this and move forward. My next video is not going to be in this series. I'm going to start doing a few other videos and then we'll come back to this because I have a few things that I want to talk about. But I appreciate you guys sticking around with us. Until next time, have a good one.